Please, he didn't do anything wrong. The words left Evelyn Carter's mouth before she could stop them. The entire courtyard seemed to freeze. A dozen heads turned toward her. Even Evelyn's own heart skipped a beat. She immediately wished she could disappear. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and destiny, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love finds the broken. Now, back to Evelyn. The Harvest Moon Gathering was the most important event of the year in the Northern Territories. Hundreds of wolves traveled for days to reach Moonhaven Palace, where music echoed through marble halls and silver lanterns glowed beneath the autumn sky. For most young women, the gathering represented opportunity. For Evelyn, it was simply another reminder of her place. She moved quietly between tables carrying trays of drinks while noble families filled the courtyard with laughter and conversation. No one noticed her unless they needed something. No one remembered her name. She preferred it that way. Attention usually brought trouble. The evening air carried the scent of pine trees and distant fireplaces. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, wolves howled beneath the rising moon. Evelyn adjusted the simple gray dress she wore and continued toward the eastern terrace. That was when she saw him. A young man stood near one of the stone fountains. Well, stood for a moment. Then someone bumped into him while rushing past. The collision wasn't severe, but it was enough to send several books slipping from his arms. Papers scattered across the ground. A few nearby guests glanced over. None stopped. Most simply continued walking. The young man sighed and knelt to gather the papers himself. Something about the scene tugged at Evelyn's heart. She quickly set her tray down and hurried over. Here, she said softly, reaching for a stack of pages before the breeze could carry them away. Thank you. His voice was calm and warm. When Evelyn looked up, she found herself staring into striking gray eyes. Not cold eyes. Kind ones. The kind that listened more than they spoke. His dark hair had fallen slightly across his forehead, and despite his simple black coat, there was something unusually composed about him. You should be careful, Evelyn said while handing him the papers. People move fast during these events. A faint smile touched his lips. I've noticed. She helped him organize the remaining documents. Most appeared to be records, maps, and official reports. Strange things for someone to carry during a celebration. You work for the palace? Evelyn asked. Something like that. His answer was vague enough to make her curious. Before she could ask another question, voices drifted from nearby. There he is. The king's brother. Always hiding with books. Evelyn glanced toward the speakers. Several nobles passed by, offering polite smiles that somehow felt dismissive. The young man simply nodded in return. Understanding dawned. So this was Lucas Blackwood, the younger brother of Alpha King Damon Blackwood. Evelyn had heard rumors about him. Most stories focused on the king. Lucas was rarely mentioned. Looking at him now, she felt unexpectedly sorry for him. Living beside someone as powerful as the Alpha King couldn't be easy. Everyone probably overlooked him. Everyone probably expected him to stand in his brother's shadow. That must be difficult, Evelyn said before she could stop herself. Lucas blinked. What is? Being compared to someone else all the time. For a second, genuine surprise crossed his face. Then he laughed softly. Not the loud laugh of a noble trying to impress a crowd. A real laugh. You're the first person who's ever said that to me. Evelyn felt her cheeks warm. Sorry, I shouldn't have assumed. No, Lucas replied. His expression grew thoughtful. Maybe you understand more than you think. Somewhere inside the palace, bells began to ring. The formal ceremonies would start soon. Guests immediately turned toward the grand hall. The crowd flowed like a river of silk and velvet beneath the lantern light. Evelyn reached for her tray again. I should get back to work. Lucas nodded. Of course. She turned and began walking away. After several steps, she glanced back. He was still standing beside the fountain watching her. Not in the way arrogant men watched women. There was curiosity in his eyes, as though he had just discovered something unexpected. And for reasons she couldn't explain, Evelyn suddenly felt that this simple conversation beneath the harvest moon might change everything. The grand hall shimmered beneath thousands of crystal lights, each one reflecting against polished marble and silver banners that hung from the towering ceiling. Evelyn Carter moved quietly between guests carrying a tray of sparkling glasses, doing her best to remain invisible. Usually that was easy. Most nobles looked through her as if she were part of the furniture. Yet tonight felt different. Every time she crossed the room, she found herself searching the crowd for one particular face. She told herself it was only curiosity. Lucas Blackwood had seemed kind, and kindness was rare inside Moonhaven Palace. Still, she could not stop thinking about the strange look in his eyes beside the fountain, as if he had recognized something in her that nobody else ever noticed. Hours passed as the celebration continued. Musicians played near the western balcony while powerful families gathered in circles discussing alliances, territory disputes, and upcoming ceremonies. Evelyn carefully delivered drinks to one table after another. More than once she heard people mention the Alpha King. His name traveled through the room like a current beneath the surface of a river. Some spoke with admiration, others with nervous respect. Yet nobody seemed interested in discussing his younger brother. Whenever Lucas was mentioned, it was usually followed by a dismissive shrug. He spends too much time reading. He is nothing like the king. Quiet people rarely matter. Evelyn frowned every time she heard comments like that. They reminded her too much of the things people said about her. By late evening, she stepped into a smaller gallery to catch her breath. Moonlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. The cool air felt wonderful after hours inside the crowded hall. I had a feeling I would find you hiding here. The familiar voice made her turn. Lucas stood near the doorway holding 2 cups of warm cider. He offered one to her with a smile. I hope this is allowed. Evelyn accepted it carefully. I think it is. Good, he said. I would hate to become a criminal before midnight. She laughed despite herself. The sound surprised her. It had been a long time since someone made her laugh so easily. For the next several minutes, they talked about simple things. Favorite seasons. Childhood memories. The forests surrounding the Northern Territories. Lucas listened far more than he spoke, but whenever he asked a question it felt genuine, as though he truly cared about the answer. Eventually Evelyn tilted her head. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you here alone? For the first time that evening, something unreadable crossed his expression. Not sadness exactly, more like hesitation. Because sometimes it is easier to learn about people when they forget who you are. Evelyn considered that. It sounded like an answer with another meaning hidden underneath. Before she could ask more, voices approached from the corridor. 2 young noble women entered the gallery. Their conversation immediately stopped when they noticed Evelyn standing beside Lucas. One exchanged a glance with the other. Interesting, one of them said. Very interesting. Their smiles looked polite, but their eyes did not. Lucas straightened slightly. Good evening. They nodded toward him with obvious respect before turning their attention back to Evelyn. Enjoying yourself? One asked. Very much, Evelyn replied. Wonderful. The woman smiled again. Just remember your place. Palace staff often forget where they belong during celebrations. The words landed softly, yet somehow felt sharp. Before Evelyn could respond, the women continued down the corridor. Silence lingered after they disappeared. Lucas stared after them with a troubled expression. You should not listen to people like that. Evelyn forced a small smile. I am used to it. You should not have to be. His voice was quiet, but something in it made her heart skip. For a brief moment, the noise of the palace faded away. Then distant bells echoed through the halls once again, signaling the beginning of another royal ceremony. Lucas looked toward the sound. Tomorrow will be interesting, he said. How interesting? Evelyn asked. A mysterious smile appeared on his face. More than you can possibly imagine. The next morning arrived wrapped in silver mist and pale sunlight. Moonhaven Palace stood proudly against the horizon, its towers glowing beneath the early autumn sky. Evelyn Carter had barely slept. Lucas Blackwood's final words from the previous evening lingered in her mind. More than you can possibly imagine. She had replayed the conversation so many times that she could practically hear his voice every time she closed her eyes. Yet no matter how much she thought about it, she could not understand what he meant. The palace came alive shortly after sunrise. Servants rushed through corridors carrying flowers, banners, and decorations for the second day of the Harvest Moon Gathering. Evelyn spent most of the morning helping prepare one of the grand reception halls. While arranging silver centerpieces across a long banquet table, she became aware of several women whispering nearby. At first she ignored them. She had learned years ago that gossip often disappeared when left alone. Unfortunately, this gossip seemed determined to find her. That is her. The servant girl? Yes. the one following Lucas Blackwood around. Evelyn kept her attention on the flowers. Her fingers tightened slightly around a silver vase. I heard she spent nearly an hour talking with him last night. How ambitious. Quiet laughter followed. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She reminded herself that none of it mattered. People made assumptions every day. Yet the comments continued throughout the morning. Everywhere she went, she noticed glances, smirks, conversations that stopped the moment she approached. By noon, even some of the younger servants seemed curious. One girl finally asked, "Is it true?" Evelyn looked up from polishing a serving tray. "Is what true?" "That Lucas Blackwood likes you." The question nearly made her drop the tray. "No, then why does he keep looking for you?" Evelyn opened her mouth, but realized she did not have an answer. Because honestly, she had been wondering the same thing. The previous evening had not been an isolated encounter. Twice already that morning, she had caught sight of Lucas in different parts of the palace. Each time he had greeted her warmly. Each time he had somehow appeared exactly where she happened to be working. It was becoming difficult to believe those meetings were accidental. The realization followed her through the afternoon until she eventually escaped into the palace gardens. The gardens stretched across several acres, filled with winding stone paths, fountains, and late-season roses. It was one of the few places where she could think clearly. Or so she hoped. "You look troubled." Evelyn turned immediately. Lucas stood beside a flowering archway, holding a book beneath one arm. Somehow he managed to appear both surprised and unsurprised to see her. "You have a habit of appearing out of nowhere," she said. His smile widened. "I have been told that before." They began walking slowly through the garden paths. Golden leaves drifted from nearby trees, carried gently by the breeze. For a while neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Finally Evelyn stopped beside a fountain. "People are talking." Lucas nodded. "I know. They think I am trying to get closer to the royal family." "And are you?" She stared at him. "No good." His answer came so quickly that it caught her off guard. "Why good?" For a moment, he seemed to consider his words carefully. "Because most people approach powerful families hoping to gain something. And what do you think I want?" Lucas studied her with those calm gray eyes. "That is exactly what makes you different." The fountain water sparkled between them. Evelyn felt her heartbeat quicken, not from romance, but from confusion. The more time she spent with him, the less sense he made. Sometimes he behaved like a forgotten younger brother. Other times he carried himself with quiet confidence that seemed completely out of place. As if he knew things nobody else knew. As if he belonged somewhere much larger than the role everyone assigned him. Then he asked a question that sent a strange chill through her chest. "Evelyn," he said softly, "if you discovered that someone was not who you believe they were, would you judge them for it?" She blinked. "I do not know. Think carefully. I suppose it would depend on why they hid the truth." Something unreadable flickered across his face again. The same expression she had noticed before. The expression of a man carrying secrets. "That is a fair answer," he said quietly. And somehow, without understanding why, Evelyn suddenly felt that an invisible clock had begun counting down towards something neither of them could stop. The following evening arrived with an energy that felt different from the celebrations before it. The palace seemed brighter somehow. More crowded. More expectant. Servants hurried through hallways carrying arrangements of white roses while musicians rehearsed in distant chambers. Everywhere Evelyn Carter looked, people appeared to be preparing for something important. Yet nobody seemed willing to explain exactly what that something was. By late afternoon, she found herself standing near one of the palace balconies overlooking the eastern gardens. The view stretched for nearly half a mile, revealing winding paths, sparkling fountains, and rolling hills beyond the palace walls. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, a strange tension lingered in the air. "There you are." Evelyn turned at the familiar voice. Lucas Blackwood approached carrying a folded invitation sealed with black wax. The silver crest pressed into the seal immediately caught her attention. It belonged to the royal household. Her eyes widened. "What is that?" Lucas extended the invitation toward her. "An invitation. I can see that." He smiled. "Then open it." Evelyn carefully broke the seal. Her heart immediately began racing as she read the elegant handwriting inside. She read it once, then again, then a third time just to make certain she was not imagining it. "Lucas," she looked up in disbelief. "This is an invitation to the Moon Palace banquet." "Yes." "Guests only." "Correct." Royal guests. Also correct. Evelyn lowered the letter slowly. There must be some mistake. Lucas looked genuinely amused. There is no mistake. I am staff. You are invited. That is not how this works. Apparently tonight it is. Evelyn stared at him, waiting for an explanation that never came. The invitation felt impossibly heavy in her hands. The Moon Palace banquet was not open to ordinary guests. It was where influential families gathered. Future alliances were discussed there. Important decisions were made there. She had spent years serving food to people attending such events. Never once had she imagined receiving an invitation herself. Why? She finally asked. Lucas glanced toward the distant gardens. Because some people deserve to be seen. The answer left her more confused than before. As sunset approached, she reluctantly followed the instructions contained in the invitation. One of the palace attendants escorted her to a guest suite where a simple but elegant gown had already been prepared. It was nothing extravagant. Soft blue fabric, silver embroidery, graceful without demanding attention. Evelyn ran her fingers across the material, wondering who had arranged all of this. The attendant simply smiled and said she had been instructed not to answer questions. By the time evening arrived, Evelyn barely recognized herself. She stood before a mirror feeling like a stranger. The gown fit perfectly. Her hair had been arranged loosely over her shoulders. For the first time in years, she looked less like a servant and more like one of the guests she usually watched from a distance. The realization felt uncomfortable, almost dangerous. A knock sounded at the door. When she opened it, Lucas stood waiting. For a moment he said nothing. His gray eyes widened slightly. You look surprised, Evelyn said nervously. I am. That bad? No, his smile appeared slowly. The opposite. Warmth touched her cheeks. Before she could respond, Lucas offered his arm. Shall we? Together, they began walking through the palace corridors. The deeper they traveled into the royal wing, the more Evelyn noticed things she had never seen before. Portraits of kings lined the walls. Guards stood at discreet intervals. Ancient symbols decorated towering archways. Everything felt larger, more significant, more secretive. Eventually, they reached a pair of enormous silver doors. Music drifted from beyond them. So did the sound of hundreds of voices. Evelyn stopped walking. Her pulse quickened. Lucas. Yes. I do not belong in there. His expression softened. You belong more than you realize. Before she could question him further, the silver doors slowly opened. Light spilled across the marble floor. Conversations echoed from within. And as Evelyn stepped across the threshold beside Lucas Blackwood, she had the unmistakable feeling that she was walking directly toward a future she could neither predict nor escape. The moment Evelyn Carter entered the banquet hall, she knew she was being watched. Hundreds of crystal lights glittered overhead while elegant conversations flowed through the enormous chamber like music. Noble families occupied circular tables draped in silver and white. Powerful wolves from every corner of the Northern Territories gathered beneath one roof. Yet despite the beauty surrounding her, an uneasy feeling settled in her chest. Lucas Blackwood walked beside her for only a few minutes before several officials approached him with questions. He apologized and promised he would return shortly. Evelyn assured him she would be fine. The moment he disappeared into the crowd, she immediately regretted those words. At first, everything seemed normal. A few guests offered polite greetings. Others simply observed her with curiosity. Then the whispers began. She noticed them spreading from table to table. Eyes followed her movements. Conversations paused whenever she passed nearby. By the time she reached one of the refreshment stations, the atmosphere around her had changed completely. There she is. The voice came from behind her. Evelyn turned to find 3 young noble women approaching. She recognized 2 of them from previous encounters inside the palace. Their smiles appeared friendly enough, but something about them felt rehearsed. You look lovely tonight, one of them said. Thank you, Evelyn replied cautiously. Lucas certainly went to a great deal of effort. Evelyn blinked. What do you mean? Another woman laughed softly. Oh, come now. You do not have to pretend with us. A strange silence followed. Evelyn suddenly felt as though she had walked into a conversation that had started long before she arrived. Pretend what? She asked. That you accidentally ended up here. The woman tilted her head. Everyone knows what is happening. Evelyn stared at them in confusion. I do not. How modest. More laughter. Around them, several nearby guests began paying attention. Evelyn became painfully aware of every pair of eyes turning toward her. "I think there is a misunderstanding," she said quietly. "Is there?" another woman asked. "Then perhaps you can explain why Lucas Blackwood has spent the entire week seeking your company." Murmurs immediately spread through the surrounding crowd. Evelyn felt heat rise into her cheeks. "We are friends." Friends. The word was repeated with obvious disbelief. How charming. For the first time since arriving, genuine anxiety tightened around her chest. Something was wrong. This conversation felt deliberate, planned. Every question seemed designed to lead somewhere. Then one of the women produced a folded piece of paper. "Interesting," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "Especially after this was found." Evelyn frowned. "Found where?" "Near your room." The woman unfolded the paper dramatically. A note requesting private meetings with members of the royal household. Evelyn's eyes widened. "That is not mine." "Of course it is not." The response came so quickly that it sounded almost practiced. More whispers spread throughout the room. Several guests exchanged knowing looks. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She finally understood. Someone had arranged this. Someone wanted her embarrassed, humiliated, removed. She searched the crowd instinctively for Lucas, but he was nowhere in sight. For the first time since meeting him, she felt completely alone. The noble women stepped closer. Their smiles never wavered. "Perhaps," one of them suggested sweetly, "you simply forgot your place." The words struck harder than they should have. Not because they were cruel, because they echoed every fear Evelyn had carried her entire life. For one terrible moment, the magnificent banquet hall seemed to shrink around her. And somewhere across the room, hidden behind dozens of conversations and smiling faces, a trap quietly began to close. The whispers grew louder. Evelyn Carter stood at the center of the banquet hall, feeling as though the floor beneath her feet had become fragile glass. Every conversation nearby seemed connected to her now. Every glance carried judgment. The folded note remained in the noblewoman's hand like a piece of evidence in a trial that Evelyn had never agreed to attend. "I have never seen that letter before," Evelyn said carefully. Her voice remained calm, but her pulse was racing. "Of course," one of the women replied. "That is exactly what someone would say." Soft laughter followed from several nearby guests. The sound was not cruel enough to be openly offensive. Somehow that made it worse. Evelyn searched the faces around her and found no allies. Only curiosity. Some people looked entertained. Others appeared eager to see what would happen next. The women exchanged satisfied glances. Their plan was working. "Perhaps," one of them continued, "the palace should know how eager certain people are to climb above their station." More murmurs spread through the crowd. Evelyn swallowed hard. She could feel old insecurities rising to the surface. Memories of being overlooked, dismissed, treated as less important than everyone else around her. The worst part was knowing that many people already believed the story, not because there was proof, because it was easier to believe the servant girl had done something wrong. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "That is enough." Relief flooded through Evelyn before she even turned around. Lucas Blackwood stepped forward from the crowd. His expression was calm, but there was something unusually firm in his eyes. The noble women immediately straightened. Several guests fell silent. "Lucas," one of the women said with a practiced smile. "We were simply discussing a misunderstanding." "No," he replied. "You were creating one." The room grew noticeably quieter. Evelyn had never seen him like this before. Gone was the gentle, easygoing man from the gardens. Standing before her now was someone who carried authority without raising his voice. The women seemed to notice the difference too. "We only wanted to protect the reputation of the royal household," one of them said. "Then you should begin by protecting your own." Lucas's answer landed with surprising weight. A few nearby guests looked away immediately. Yet despite his words, the situation did not improve. More nobles continued gathering around them. More questions surfaced. More speculation spread through the hall. It was as though the rumor had already grown beyond anyone's ability to control. Evelyn watched frustration appear in Lucas's expression for the first time. He looked toward the entrance of the hall, then toward a group of senior officials, then back toward her, as though he were waiting for something or someone. "Lucas," Evelyn said quietly, "you do not need to do this." His eyes immediately found hers. "Yes," he said, "I do." The answer surprised her. Before she could respond, a palace steward approached. The older man bowed respectfully toward Lucas. "Sir," he said in a low voice. Lucas listened carefully. Whatever he heard caused his expression to change. Not fear, not concern, recognition, as though an expected moment had finally arrived. The steward stepped away. The room remained strangely tense. Conversations faded one by one until only scattered voices remained. Evelyn frowned. Something was happening. She could feel it. Guests were turning toward the far end of the hall. Noble families were standing. Even the musicians had stopped playing. A ripple moved through the crowd like wind across still water. Lucas exhaled slowly. For the first time since she met him, he looked almost relieved. Then he glanced at Evelyn and offered a small smile filled with secrets she still did not understand. "I am sorry," he said softly. "For what?" His gray eyes reflected the crystal lights overhead. "For what comes next?" Before Evelyn could ask another question, the enormous silver doors at the far end of the banquet hall began to open, and every person in the room immediately fell silent. Silence swept through the banquet hall with astonishing speed. One moment hundreds of conversations filled the air. The next, the entire room stood frozen beneath the crystal chandeliers. Evelyn Carter felt her heartbeat echo in her ears as she turned toward the massive silver doors. Every noble family had risen to their feet. Even the women who had spent the evening mocking her now stood perfectly still, their attention fixed on the entrance. The doors opened completely. A tall figure stepped into the hall. The effect was immediate. It was not because he announced himself. He did not need to. Presence alone accomplished what words never could. Alpha King Damon Blackwood moved through the doorway with calm, measured steps. He wore a black formal coat trimmed with silver, and the room seemed to shift around him as though everyone instinctively made space for his arrival. His dark hair framed a face that appeared carved from confidence and discipline. Yet it was his eyes that captured Evelyn's attention. Sharp silver eyes. Observant eyes. Eyes that seemed capable of seeing far more than anyone wanted him to see. Everywhere he walked, guests lowered their gazes respectfully. Some bowed their heads. Others stepped aside entirely. The power surrounding him was not loud. It was controlled. Absolute. Evelyn had heard stories about the Alpha King her entire life. Some called him brilliant. Others called him intimidating. Standing only 30 feet away, she realized none of those descriptions felt large enough. Damon Blackwood reached the center of the hall and stopped. The silence remained unbroken. Then something happened that made Evelyn's confusion deepen. Lucas walked forward. Not cautiously, not nervously. He moved directly toward the Alpha King with complete confidence. The crowd watched closely. Evelyn expected him to bow, to step aside, to show the same deference everyone else displayed. He did neither. Instead, Damon turned toward him and gave a small nod. A gesture of mutual understanding passed between them. It lasted only a second, but the meaning was unmistakable. They were not standing as a king and a forgotten younger brother. They stood as equals in trust. A murmur spread quietly through the room. Evelyn's mind raced. Nothing about the scene matched the image she had built during the past week. Lucas glanced toward her. There was apology in his expression, and relief, as though a burden he had carried for a very long time was finally being set down. Then Damon spoke. His voice was calm, yet every person in the hall heard it clearly. "I understand there has been some confusion this evening." Several nobles immediately looked uncomfortable. The women who had accused Evelyn exchanged nervous glances. Damon slowly surveyed the room. "I also understand that assumptions have been made." No one answered. No one dared. Evelyn stood motionless. Somehow she felt certain that the evening was no longer about the rumors. Something much larger was unfolding. Damon turned slightly toward Lucas. Was everything observed? Lucas nodded once. Everything. Evelyn's breath caught. Observed. The word echoed through her thoughts. Not investigated. Not reported. Observed. As though the entire evening had served another purpose. As though someone had been watching far more carefully than she realized. Damon looked toward Evelyn then. For the first time, the Alpha King's silver eyes settled directly on hers. The crowded hall seemed to disappear. The noise vanished. Even the anxiety that had followed her all evening faded beneath the weight of that gaze. She could not explain why. She only knew that nothing about this moment felt accidental. And deep inside, a quiet voice whispered a realization that frightened her more than anything else. She had never truly understood why Lucas Blackwood entered her life. Until now, the silence lingered long after the Alpha King's gaze settled on Evelyn Carter. She stood motionless beneath the crystal lights, feeling as though the entire banquet hall had narrowed to a single moment. Around her, hundreds of guests waited. No one seemed willing to speak first. No one wanted to interrupt whatever was happening between the king, Lucas Blackwood, and the young woman who only days earlier had been carrying trays through palace corridors. Damon Blackwood slowly turned his attention back toward the crowd. There appears to be a misunderstanding regarding Miss Carter. His voice remained calm, but every word carried effortlessly through the hall. Several nobles immediately lowered their eyes. The women responsible for the accusations looked noticeably uncomfortable. Damon continued. For the past week, many assumptions have been made about her intentions. A few guests shifted nervously. Others remained frozen. Those assumptions were incorrect. The statement landed with remarkable force. Not because it was loud, because it came from the king himself. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. She still did not understand what was happening. Then Damon glanced toward Lucas. Tell them. Lucas exhaled softly before stepping forward. His expression carried none of the uncertainty she had once mistaken for weakness. For the first time, Evelyn saw him exactly as he truly was. Confident, intelligent, entirely certain of his place. Miss Carter was never seeking influence, Lucas said. She was never attempting to gain favor from the royal household. His gray eyes briefly met hers. In fact, she repeatedly avoided opportunities that most people would have pursued. Confused murmurs spread through the room. Lucas continued. She helped someone she believed had little value to offer her. Evelyn blinked. The words struck unexpectedly deep. When others ignored him, she stopped. Lucas smiled faintly. When others judged him, she listened. A strange emotion tightened in Evelyn's chest. Slowly, she began to understand. The noble women who had mocked her exchanged alarmed glances. Their confidence was disappearing quickly. You all believed she approached me because of my family name, Lucas said. The truth is far simpler. She approached me because she thought I was lonely. Quiet laughter rippled through parts of the hall. Not cruel laughter this time. Warm laughter. Human laughter. Lucas looked toward Evelyn again. She believed I spent my life hidden behind my brother's shadow. Heat immediately rushed to Evelyn's cheeks. She wanted the floor to open beneath her. The memory felt painfully embarrassing now. Yet Lucas's smile only widened. And despite believing that, she treated me with kindness. Silence followed. A different silence. Softer than before. Several guests seemed uncertain where to look. Others appeared thoughtful. The atmosphere inside the hall was changing. The story people had created about Evelyn was unraveling piece by piece. Then Damon spoke again. Lucas was never sent to monitor her. Evelyn frowned slightly. Sent. Damon continued. He volunteered. A visible wave of surprise moved through the room. Evelyn turned toward Lucas in disbelief. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck, looking unexpectedly sheepish. I may have been curious. Curious? Damon repeated dryly. You interrupted 3 council meetings. More surprised reactions spread through the crowd. For the first time all evening, genuine smiles appeared on several faces. Even Evelyn found herself struggling not to laugh. Yet beneath the humor remained a deeper realization. Lucas had not been accidentally appearing wherever she happened to be. He had been choosing those moments, choosing those conversations, choosing her company. Damon stepped forward once more. The room immediately quieted. There is one final truth that everyone here should understand. His silver eyes moved across the gathered nobles before returning to Evelyn. The most important part of this story has not yet been revealed. And as those words settled across the hall, Evelyn felt the unmistakable sensation that her entire life was standing on the edge of changing forever. The banquet hall remained silent after the Alpha King's final words. Hundreds of guests stood beneath the crystal lights waiting for what would come next. Evelyn Carter felt as though time itself had slowed. Her heart beat steadily against her ribs while uncertainty and anticipation tangled together inside her chest. She looked from Damon Blackwood to Lucas and back again, searching for answers that still seemed just beyond her reach. Damon took a single step forward. The movement was small, yet every eye in the room followed him. For many years, he said calmly, I have met countless people who desired something from the throne. His gaze swept across the hall. Status, influence, recognition, advantage. No one interrupted. There is nothing unusual about that. Power attracts attention. It always has. He paused briefly before looking directly at Evelyn. What is unusual is finding someone who offers kindness when they believe there is nothing to gain from it. The words settled over the room like falling snow. Evelyn felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Damon continued. You believed Lucas was simply a man overlooked by those around him. A faint smile appeared on the king's face. You never treated him as a connection. You never treated him as an opportunity. You treated him as a person. Across the hall, several nobles lowered their eyes. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Others had measured worth by titles and influence. Evelyn had not. When others assumed, Damon said, you listened. When others judged, you chose compassion instead. Evelyn's eyes drifted toward Lucas. For the first time since meeting him, she fully understood the meaning behind so many strange conversations. The questions, the appearances, the curiosity, none of it had been accidental. Lucas offered her a warm smile, one filled with gratitude. You once told me something, Lucas said softly. His voice carried through the silent hall. You said being compared to someone else all the time must be difficult. Laughter gently rippled through the crowd. Even Evelyn felt herself smiling despite her embarrassment. Nobody had ever said that to me before, Lucas admitted. Nobody had ever looked at me and worried about how I felt instead of what I represented. The sincerity in his voice made the room grow quiet again. Then Damon spoke once more. That is why you were invited here. Evelyn blinked. What? The word escaped before she could stop it. Several guests smiled. Damon looked almost amused. Not because of a mistake. More warmth touched Evelyn's cheeks. Not because of a misunderstanding. He stepped closer. And certainly not because someone felt sorry for you. Every fear she had carried throughout her life seemed to unravel one thread at a time. Damon stopped a few feet away. His silver eyes held her steadily. You belong here because your character earned a place here. No one spoke. No one moved. The entire hall seemed suspended in the moment. Then Damon removed the formal silver cloak resting across his shoulders. Gasps immediately spread through the crowd. Slowly and deliberately, he placed it around Evelyn's shoulders. The fabric felt surprisingly warm. For a heartbeat, she could not breathe. From this day forward, Damon said, his voice carrying through every corner of the hall, no one in this kingdom will question your worth. Emotion rose unexpectedly inside Evelyn's chest. Not because she had been chosen, not because she stood beside a king, but because for the first time in her life, someone had seen her exactly as she was and declared that she was enough. Around them, the silence finally broke. Applause spread through the hall. Then more still. Noble families, palace officials, servants, and guests rose together beneath the crystal lights. Lucas smiled broadly. Damon stepped back, allowing Evelyn to take in the moment. Beyond the towering windows, the moon shone brightly over Moonhaven Palace. And for the first time since arriving there, Evelyn no longer felt invisible. She felt seen.